A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. In the name of Allah, the most beneficent and merciful. Assalamu alaikum. May peace, blessings, and mercy of Allah Ta'ala be upon you and to all the messengers of Allah, and in particular on the noble and final messenger, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, his family, and his companions. Let me present to you the sixth lecture video series of CIA Part 2 Practice of Internal Auditing for all the exams beginning in 2020. We will be continuing our section C in this video as well. What are the computerized assisted audit techniques? There are four techniques: A. Generalized audit software, B. Utility software, C. Application software for tracing and mapping, and D. Expert system software. What is data mining and extraction? Data mining is the process of looking for patterns or other useful information, usually from an enterprise-wide database or a data warehouse. Extraction refers both to extracting data and extracting patterns or knowledge from the data to produce useful business information. What is an embedded audit module? An embedded audit module is a process built within a regular production program that conducts special auditing tasks. It is easier to develop embedded audit modules when an application is designed rather than adding it later. During regular data processing, the embedded audit module selects and records specific data for later analysis and evaluation by an auditor. Embedded audit modules also allow the continuous monitoring. What is automated working papers? Automated working papers are computer based audit papers that make the audit documentation much more comfortable than using written, manually prepared work papers because the auditors will enter the results of their testing directly into the computer. By entering directly into the audit automated working papers, all of the working papers are automatically cross-referenced, adjusted, and balanced by the computer as new information is entered. What are the advantages of automated working papers? The advantages of automated working papers are a reduction in the risk of clerical and math errors, neater and more organized working papers that are easy to review, easier adjustments to the work papers. Standard work paper forms do not need to be created and prepared for each engagement. The working papers can be easily accessed from multiple locations, making the review process much more efficient. What is an extended record technique? Extended records refer to the technique of modifying a program to tag specific transactions and then saving all of the processing steps in an extended record, which permits an audit trail to be reconstructed from one file to those transactions. What is a snapshot technique? The snapshot technique takes a picture of a transaction as it is processed. Program code is added to the application, instructing it to save the contents of selected memory areas. A snapshot is commonly used as a debugging technique. As an audit tool, snapshots can be used only for transactions that exceeds predetermined limits. What is mapping? Mapping uses special software to monitor the execution of a program by counting the number of times each program statement in the program is executed. Originally, mapping was a technique for program design and testing, but auditors began using it to determine if program statements were being performed. Mapping therefore makes sure that the program is running matches the code that was written and has not been changed. It can also locate a dead code that is not being used and can flag code that might be used for fraudulent purposes. What is tagging and tracing? In tagging and tracing, Certain transactions are identified when they are input and then followed through the computer system until they are output. This process enables the auditor to confirm that all of the procedures were applied to a specific transaction. Tracing provides a detailed audit trail of all the instructions executed by a program. A single trace can produce thousands of output records, so the auditor must take care to limit the number of transactions that are tagged. Tracing might verify that internal controls in an application are being executed as the program is processing data. A trace may also reveal sections of unexecuted program code, which can indicate incorrect or unauthorized modifications made to the program. What is control reprocessing? The auditor receives a verified copy of the processing program that the auditee is using and then runs the information or transactions through the verified program. The results of this test are compared to the actual results. What are the methods to test the computer system? There are three main methods that the internal auditor can use to test that the computer system accurately processes data. Number one, test data approach. Number two, integrated test facility. And number three, parallel simulation. What is test data approach? The objective of the test data approach is to verify the processing accuracy of programs and any programming changes. Test data is information prepared by an auditor that contains both valid and invalid data, whether real or fictitious. Next, the input is processed manually to determine the correct output. Then the auditor tests the data processing on a client's computer that is under the auditor's direct control. After processing the test data electronically, the auditor compares the manually processed results with the electronically processed results to determine the accuracy. What is an integrated test facility? An integrated test facility is used to audit large computer systems that employ real-time processing. An ITF uses test data and fictitious test entities that are processed concurrently with real transactions. Therefore, the main difference between the test data approach and an ITF is that the test data in an ITF is processed alongside the real data. By utilizing an ITF, the auditor can be sure that the test data is being processed by the same system as the live data. Only the auditor knows which entries are fictitious. Careful planning is required to make sure that ITF data does not become mixed in with the real data. Therefore, fictitious transactions have to be excluded from the normal outputs of the system. This exclusion may be done manually or by modifying the application programs. Either way, the fictitious transactions must be identified by special codes so they can be segregated from the real data. There are costs involved in developing an ITF. However, after the initial expenditures, ongoing operating costs are low because there is no special processing required and thus no interruption of normal computer activity. What is parallel simulation? The parallel simulation uses real data rather than the test data and processes it through test or the audit programs. The output from the parallel simulation is then compared with the output from the real processing. Parallel simulation is expensive and time consuming, and thus it is usually limited to sections of an audit that are of significant concern and are important enough to require an examination of all transactions. Because parallel simulation is done with test programs, it can be done on a computer other than the one used for real processing. However, the auditor should make sure that the live system used for processing is the one that is used all the time and not one that has been swapped in for the audit, perhaps because the normal system is committing fraud or bypassing controls. What are the requirements of the standard 2310? Identifying information. Internal auditors must identify sufficient, reliable, relevant, and useful information to achieve the engagement's objectives. What are some of the process mapping methods? Some process mapping methods are flowcharts, data flow diagrams, and narratives. Define flowchart. Flowcharts are diagrams that create a visual representation of processes or events, usually through text boxes and arrows representing chain of command or order of events. Flowcharts are useful in detailing a company's internal controls or any other related process. They also enable the auditor to identify areas where internal controls are required. What is a systems or horizontal flowchart? A systems or horizontal flowchart is a type of flowchart which shows the different departments or functions involved in a process and clearly outlines the segregation of duties. Furthermore, it documents both manual and computer processes as well as the input, output, and processing steps. A horizontal flowchart identifies specific control points in the system. A control point is a point in a process where an error or irregularity is likely to occur, thereby creating a need for control. What is a program or vertical flowchart? A program or vertical flowchart is a type of flowchart that depicts the specific steps in the process and how they are executed. It does not usually show the system components as clearly as a horizontal flowchart. This type of flowchart is not commonly used, having been replaced by other, more effective techniques. What is a data flow diagram? A data flow diagram is a graphical notation of the path and transformation of data as it moves through an information system as compared to flowcharts which focuses on control flow. The five essential elements shown in a data diagram are A. Data sources, where the information comes from. B. Data destinations, where the information goes. C. Data flows, how the data gets there. D. Transformation processes, what happens to the data. E. Data storage, how the data is stored long term. What are the narratives? With the narrative approach, controls and their descriptions are written out. The advantages of the narrative approach are it can be tailor made for each process and it requires a detailed analysis and thus forces the reviewer to understand the structure of the function. Disadvantages of the narrative approach. The narrative may be time consuming to create, the description may become long and cumbersome to read, weaknesses in the system are not always obvious, the reviewer may overlook substantial portions of the internal control. What are spaghetti maps? Spaghetti diagrams create a dynamic visual representation of physical items moving through a system using colored lines and direction arrows to represent the way that various sites interconnect. An analyst can use a spaghetti diagram to analyze a given process to identify inefficient pathways and to suggest the improvements. What are the uses of analytical procedures? Analytical procedures are useful in identifying unexpected differences, the absence of differences when they are expected, potential errors, potential fraud or illegal acts, other unusual or non recurring transactions or events. What are the factors that internal auditors consider while using the analytical procedures? Internal auditors may use analytical procedures to generate evidence during the audit engagement. When determining the extent of analytical procedures, The internal auditor considers the significance of the area being audited, assessment of risk management in the area being audited, adequacy of the internal control system, availability and reliability of financial and non-financial information, the precision with which the results of analytical audit procedures can be predicted, availability and comparability of information regarding the industry in which the organization operates, the extent to which other procedures provide evidence. What purpose does the engagement working paper serve? Engagement working papers generally aid in the planning, performance, and review of engagements, provide the principal support for engagement results, document whether engagement objectives were achieved, support the accuracy and completeness of the work performed, provide a basis for the internal audit activities, quality assurance and improvement program, and facilitate third party reviews. What are the contents of working papers? The working paper should include documentation of the following parts of the engagement: planning, examination and evaluation of internal control system, the procedures performed, evidence obtained, and the conclusions reached, the review process, communications from the engagement client, and any necessary follow up. What risk does the electronic working papers pose? Electronic working papers present specific security related issues. Data protection. Electronically stored information is always at risk of being irretrievably lost. Therefore, the company needs procedures for the regular and consistent backup of electronic data. These backups should be stored in an offsite location, and proper security needs to be maintained over both the backups and original data source. Data access. Because electronic information can be accessed through internal networks and the internet, the company needs to have sufficient identification checks and passwords to restrict access. Changing data. Only authorized people must have the ability to change files. Accordingly, there must be different levels of access, usually controlled by passwords. Some people will have read only access, while others will be able to change data. Generally, only the person who created a file should have the ability to make changes to it. What are the types of working paper files? There are two main types of files in which working papers are stored. Number one, the current file. The current file contains all the documents related to the current year's engagement. And number two, the permanent file. The permanent file includes documents relevant to multiple engagements across the several years. What are the items that are kept in the permanent working paper file? Items that are commonly kept in the permanent files are communication and reports from previous engagements, results of reviews done after the engagement are completed, chart of accounts, updated organizational charts, long-term contracts, debt agreements, share documentation, historical financial information, management reports, corporate charter and other corporate documents, significant correspondence related to the engagement. The candidates are requested to complete the 32 true and false questions from the study book of section C. Here comes now the end of the section C. May Allah, the Lord of the heavens and the earth, bless you in this world and in particular in life hereafter. Amen. WhatsApp me on 923111224261 for any study related queries. Have a nice day. Take care. Allah Hafiz.